So Laura, today we're gonna talk a little bit and get you to reflect a little bit about the lesson that I came in and observed the other day. And I want to give you an opportunity, first of all, to talk about it, but also to think about a strength of the lesson, because there was lots of strengths, and then an area that we might want to polish or strengthen a little bit, and then we'll talk about some next steps. And then we'll share your scores for the lesson at the end after we've had a good conversation. And it'll take about 15 or 20 minutes. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Any questions?
No.
All right. So let's just go ahead and kind of get into it. So as you reflect back on that lesson, I want you to think about what were some of the strengths of it, or just your general impressions of the lesson as you reflected.
Mm-hmm. Well, overall, I felt the lesson went well. I was very proud of the students, the way that they worked with their instructional groups and working cooperatively with one another. There was some really good conversation going on between group members. And even from start to finish, I felt like it was even a bonding experience with the whole class after looking at this lesson and looking at things from different perspectives and point of views. And the kids, even after the lesson, were giving me examples of, their everyday lives that they can apply this to. So I was really excited with that. As far as the actual academic focus with that inferencing, some kids they struggled a little with it. And so I'm already making the mental notes and jotting down who I need to kind of pull a little more to give that solid foundation so that we can continue to work on making inferences and drawing those conclusions with our reading block. So overall, though, I was happy with the lesson and what the kids got out of it.
Great. So you noticed that the kids were really engaged and really getting into that lesson as you're reflecting back on it. And you noticed that maybe there was a few of the students had some struggles here and there, but overall, they really did kind of enjoy and take some good things away. So as you continue to reflect on this, I want you to think about for a moment, why is it important to consistently monitor your students' behavior and reinforce positive behaviors?
Well, even specifically for this lesson, there was a lot of group activities and instructional groups going on, and so as you saw, I was moving all over that classroom. At one point, I was in the front, the other was in the back. It was like, where's Miss Hill now? But it's very important to monitor that because it's kind of like a snowball effect, I feel. Like once one student starts to get off with their behavior, it kind of starts trickling and it starts building and building and building. So I just make a very big point of it to make sure that if I need to stop it, I do it quickly with little time, little instructional time lost if possible. But to constantly be listening to what my students are saying with their group conversations, to be watching their body language, because and sometimes I can tell, okay, we're not doing what we should be doing over here because of your body language, or over here your face shows me that you were just utterly confused with what's at hand right now. So just to constantly be listening to those conversations and visually observing the students, I find is key, especially in our classroom, because we do so much group work. Like it's so important that the behavior is being monitored. And with the diverse classroom, with the ability levels and learning styles of my children, it's just I need to be there to facilitate if I need to. So, and I just think with our culture of our classroom, it really lends itself to that family culture, because I have students that do feel comfortable making mistakes in our classroom because they know I'm not going to tolerate a student making fun of them or, making them feel inferior. So it also lends itself to our classroom culture, too.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's important because the students feel safe, and it creates that environment that all of you can learn together and grow together. And that was just so obvious in the lesson. And I want you to stop and think for a moment, what might happen if you didn't do those things?
Well, I have some strong personalities in that room right now that are popping in my head. And I think it would change that culture. It would change our culture from being a positive, safe culture to one that I won't have my students participating as much. I don't think that the collaboration between the groups would run as smoothly. Basically, I think the learning would just break down. And, those expectations and those goals that I would set for lessons, students would not be able, to accomplish them because behavior is getting in the way.
And oftentimes that is exactly what happens. The learning stops because the culture's broken and the teacher's not there monitoring and supporting students. And again, that was a strength in this lesson. Some evidence that I have that speaks to that is throughout the lesson, the students were engaged in the activities that you assigned to them, both in the whole group and the small group setting. Through the lesson, you monitored student behavior by consistently walking around the room, talking with your students to ensure that they were adhering to the directions you had provided. You also used choral responses and signals like, I love cheeseburger, cheeseburger. Oh, it was fun. And you also would say class, and they'd say, yes, Mrs. Hill, to keep them on track and to keep them focused. And you also redirected your students when needed. For example, when little old Riley, when he was off task, immediately you just said Riley in a very firm voice, and he immediately got back to work. So it was obvious he knew those expectations. And when one group of students was not working according to their individualized specific roles, you quickly redirected them. And you said, no, who's person one? Who needs to be writing? And by consistently monitoring your students' behavior and by reinforcing those positive behaviors with your smiles, your head nods, your affirmations, your students are able to enjoy learning in your class because they feel so safe and cared for. So I urge you to continue to do that because, it makes even me, I don't want to leave your room. It makes me feel at home when I'm there with you.
Well, we're family. We are. We start from day one, so.
Yeah, and that's so important, so important. And then when you're asking them to do the difficult things.
Right.
Yeah. And so as we kind of transition or shift gears, there was so many positive things that were going on in the room. Let's talk for a little bit about, and you mentioned this a little earlier when you were speaking about some of the students, you were concerned that maybe they might struggle just a little bit, and so talk a little bit about what you noticed in terms of your students and where maybe there was a little bit of a challenge for some.
Well, I'd mentioned in our pre-conference that we had just been looking at the skills of character traits and point of view in isolation. And so this was the first time that we were taking those skills and trying to combine them together to, have the students form these inferences and draw these conclusions. And so an area that I did find a few of them struggling was trying to bridge that gap in between it. And it was okay. And, I tried to do a lot of modeling kind of in the beginning of the lesson of, what Mrs. LaRue would be thinking in this aspect and why. And I tried to go around group to group and ask some questions here and there. But after thinking about it and reflecting on it, just my students are not only, they need to hear it, but they also need to see it. So I think now that I'm reflecting on it, I think just kind of giving them some type of visual, like an anchor chart or something to kind of guide their thinking where they take a character trait of a character and the point of view that character might be coming to a scenario with, and being able to give them little question starters to help them form those inferences, I think might help some of those struggling students. Because I noticed it, whole group, it was brought up when some of them just couldn't get the idea that Mrs. LaRue what would she say here, or, what would Ike's reaction be here? And then I heard it small group a little too, so... Yeah.
So you were noticing that there was some misunderstandings by some of the students, and you're thinking that maybe providing them a little bit more support, might be helpful to them as you go through. And it's so important, like you said, to anticipate those things that might be happening with those student understandings, and then some techniques to kind of mitigate that. So let me give you some evidence, and you've already spoken to some of it because you're so with it when you're teaching. But some things that were noticed were in the lesson, you did anticipate some possible student misunderstandings by providing models for your students to show them your expectations. However, there were those points where some students really did struggle with making that inference. And so as we think about it, some of the students really struggled even in the beginning in the whole group setting there when you asked them, what would Mrs. LaRue say? What did I say when I modeled it for you? And a student responded that Miss LaRue would say, Dear Ike, I think prison is the best thing for you. And you redirected the student by saying, it's not prison, what is it? What are we going to do, punish him? No, I would say, you told them, Ike, I've sent you to the best dog academy in the United States, and I know it will make you such a better dog. And as you continued on and we're working with the students, they still struggled a little bit in trying to make that bridge. Like you said, those skills kind of coming together.
Right.
It was difficult for some. Furthermore, in the smaller groups, some of the students struggled when the group you worked with Dr. Wilfrey,
yes.
the Dr. Wilfrey group, and it was so cute. I mean, they said, well, you're now Dr. Wilfrey, you told them. What would he say about Ike whimpering like that? And a student said, he'd say, you're a faker.
Yes, it was Lisa.
Yeah. And then you responded, so you think he's faking? Do you think he's faking, Caleb? Do you think he's really sick? You told him, and let's go back and think of it as if you're Dr. Wilfrey. Okay, you're Dr. Wilfrey, you told him. You have a medical degree. What would you say to Ike if you were Dr. Wilfrey and he complained about his paw hurting? And students still, even with those great guiding questions you were pushing them to, they still were just not quite there. So I'm going to suggest to you just a model or some things that perhaps you could try that might strengthen this. Because making a simple inference requires students, to use those text clues and their background knowledge and all of those other skills are coming together and smoke's coming out their ears and it's difficult. Some students just need some very explicit model to assist them in making that inference. When you model with students, it's helpful if you identify the process that you're going to be using. Mm-hmm. So making that thinking visible for them by having students identifying those questions maybe that you're going to ask yourself, making that just super explicit for them so that as they go through it, they'll understand that, oh, I can ask myself these questions. And you were onto something really, really good there with a visual.
Yeah.
Visually posting those questions. Some questions I thought about that could be helpful that you might want to think about using would be something like, what do I know about this character? Before you go into the role model of Mrs. LaRue, thinking to yourself, now what do I know? What does Miss Hill know about this character? What do I know? And then thinking like, if I were the character, how would I feel about Ike and why? So just kind of thinking those questions aloud, having them visually, like you mentioned, with an anchor chart or something, would be really helpful. So as students got to that place where they were doing it on their own, they first had done the thinking step that they needed to bridge that. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, definitely. Like I already have a poster in my head.
Yeah, I knew you would. I already got it in your head.
Okay.
So as you think about those suggestions that we just discussed, how could you use that in a future lesson?
Well, I think definitely to keep with the modeling, throughout the lesson and stuff, but to make sure that I'm identifying that these might be some misunderstanding or struggles that my students may face. So just be ready for something like a visual to know that I shouldn't just verbally communicate it. I also need to show them and something that they can refer to when I leave them and go work maybe with another group or something.
Yeah.
So, and I think with that higher order inference thinking, focusing, I heard you say how and why. So talking about developing your character first and then focusing on, how would they feel, and then why would they feel it? I think those are two powerful question words that would help guide their thinking a little better.
And like you said, that visual is going to make such a huge difference
time.
for those kids. And then you can work with the other, students as you differentiate and do what you need to do. It'll really help them. And by doing that, it's also going to increase their understanding overall and push student achievement up as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also another thing is with some of my gifted kids, I was a little disappointed with they weren't as descriptive when they were trying to draw their inferences. And so I think this would help them as well, kind of dive deeper into it.
And really thinking about those character traits and pulling all of that together at once.
Yeah.
Because that's tricky.
That's
really tricky for kids, but as more and more is required of them, our teaching has to rise to the occasion, which yours always does.
Thank you.
Yes. So as we think about this, why is it so important to think about and anticipate possible student misunderstandings and develop teaching techniques to mitigate concerns? Why is that important?
Well, it lets me know, I know as a teacher with my kids, where they're going to struggle. And I think for me, it's very important in my pre-planning process that, while I'm developing my lessons, that I make points that I may have to stop here and do additional modeling or questioning, and also just be ready in case I need to do something with more of a visual. But I think it lends itself to that pre-planning especially. And then when I'm teaching the lessons, to realize that if I need to stop here and kind of reinforce either certain students or even whole group, I might have to.
Yeah.
So I don't know, because I don't want my students to be frustrated.
Yeah.
And I know that when they have these misunderstandings that they become frustrated with the learning. And that's not my goal at all. My goal is I want them to feel successful with their learning. So if I can anticipate where some of these misunderstandings and struggles might come, hopefully I can have some stuff to give them to help them persevere through it.
Yeah, so it's going to be important in that pre-planning piece to think through where are the challenges and how can I anticipate if it's going to be a lot of higher order thinking.
Right.
What could I do? And even in the moment as you're going around, if you're noticing those struggles, like you said, to stop and pull them together and say, let me give you some additional scaffolding to help.
Definitely. That's scaffolding. Yeah. That was the next word I was thinking. I was like, what is it called? Oh, it's scaffolding.
Yes. Scaffold up. Exactly. Yes. Okay, so I want to tell you, too, as tomorrow, I'm going to stop by your class, and I'd like us to have a conversation about the kinds of support you feel like you might need as you're implementing this.
Great.
From me, anything that I can do to help you. And also, before we move into sharing scores, I want you to think about for just a minute, what were some of the good things you heard today in our conversation?
I heard that my students were engaged in the lesson and working collaboratively with one another. And they tried to dive into a higher order thinking skill. Some struggled, but I feel that I have some tools that I can give them to put in their backpack, that they can fall back on, kind of developing that character and asking the how and why. I'm going to make sure I make a visual of it. But I really feel like they have some tools that they'll be able to use as we continue our unit on, especially with this skill that's causes them to really think, causes us to think. So
causes us all to think.
Yes.
Yeah. So taking that and knowing that the things that you've really adapted into your practice and changed in your practice, such as your managing of your classroom and that culture, it really does allow you now to build on your own practice and incorporate those strengths into helping your students grow more. So I just thank you for the work you're doing with our kids.
Thank you.
And so now, as we kind of wrap that up, let's go ahead and let's just share your scores and talk a little bit about the scoring process. Okay?
Great.